Have you ever wondered what the most terrifying secret ever buried in the heart of European royalty is? Not a treasure, not a lost throne, but something so personal it sends shivers down your spine. Deep in the dark labyrinth beneath the royal palace of Madrid, where dim silver candlelight flickers on blood-red velvet curtains, a bizarre rumor has been simmering for more than 2 centuries. The story whispers that when King Ferdinand VII died in 1833, a part of his body was removed and preserved in a sealed glass jar in strong alcohol. But what was preserved was not his heart, not his brain, but his genitals, the primal and sensual symbol of male power. This bizarre legend has spread in the shadows of the royal courts and is sometimes recorded in censored chronicles as if it were an indelible stain on the history of Spanish royalty. Was it just a figment of a dark imagination? Or did someone really decide to keep the masculine symbol of Spain's most hated king as a sick trophy? Ferdinand VII is remembered not for his great conquests or reforms, but for a grisly mystery surrounding his flesh. To understand how the story of his haunting remains became a royal legacy, we must trace the bloody and scandalous life of this king who was forsaken by history. He was a king but should have been born a tragic comedian because his life was a series of betrayals and cowardice to the point of shame. Ferdinand VII, a prince born in the shadow of a rotten empire. In 1784, he was born into the corrupt Spanish court, the son of Charles IV and Maria Luisa. The country was gradually losing its position as a great power. Its colonies were disintegrating, its navy was in ruins, its economy was collapsing, and the shadow of Napoleon was looming over the peninsula. From a young age, Fernando showed cunning and perverse ambition. While still a prince, he secretly conspired with Napoleon to betray not only his father, but also his nation, by sending secret letters asking for help from the invader. In 1808, he forced his father to abdicate and declared himself king. But just 2 months later, Napoleon summoned him to Bayonne and persuaded him to hand over the throne to his brother Joseph Bonaparte in exchange for a sum of money and the promise of a comfortable life in France. Without coercion, Fernando voluntarily signed away the monarchy in one of the most humiliating chapters in the history of European monarchy. While the Spanish people were bleeding in the resistance, he was leisurely sitting at the French banquet table, toasting champagne, eating oysters and flirting. To the people, he was not a king but a traitor in a royal mask. Forced into exile in France, Fernando VII of Spain lost not only his throne but also his image as a strong king. Diplomatic letters preserved in the French National Archives began to reveal vague but suggestive details about his lack of manhood. Not simply political cowardice, records also speculated that the king may have suffered from impotence, which casts deep doubt on why he so easily gave up the throne in exchange for a life of luxury at the hands of Napoleon. When the French Empire collapsed in 1814, Fernando returned to Madrid. But he did not return as a savior, but as a puppet on strings, greeted by a people who were hopelessly naive. And the historical deception began. Shortly after his return to the throne, his first act was to abolish the Constitution of 1812, a progressive document drafted during his exile. Fernando quickly re-established the old autocracy, brutally suppressing all liberal tendencies. His rule was nothing less than a nightmare that spread throughout Spain, where every seed of resistance was stifled with blood and iron. But the darkest side lay not in politics but in the harem. Fernando married 4 times, and each time was a shameful disaster. His first marriage to Maria Antonia of Naples ended childless, and rumors abounded, ranging from the marriage not being consummated to suspicions of sexual impotence. His second wife, Isabel de Braganza, considered intelligent and virtuous, also left no heir after 3 years of marriage before her sudden death. With his third wife, Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony, things turned from tragedy to bitter comedy. The royal couple were so desperate that they held night vigils, consulted doctors everywhere, and even went on pilgrimages in the hope of conceiving a child. But for 7 years, the Spanish throne remained cold and uncontested. In the courts of Europe, Fernando became a laughingstock, a king unable to fulfill his sacred royal duty to maintain the royal bloodline. Darker stories began to emerge. Some secret documents from foreign envoys detailed his special physical problems that went beyond mere impotence. Some leaflets circulated secretly in Madrid were so bold as to suggest that the king had a congenital genital defect or a serious illness that had rendered him completely sterile. 3 wives, no children, a forced marriage, and then 2 princesses were born, but with that came chilling rumors about the truth behind the cradle. By 1829, the Spanish court was in an embarrassing stalemate. King Fernando VII, then 45 years old and 3 times married without an heir, was forced to remarry for the 4th time under heavy pressure from the royal council. This time, the chosen one was Maria Cristina of the Bourbon II Sicilies, a girl just 22 years old, and also a distant cousin of the king. This marriage was not a love match, but a last-ditch move to save both the throne and Fernando's rotting reputation. Surprisingly, less than a year later, Maria Cristina announced her pregnancy. In October 1830, she gave birth to Princess Isabella. 2 years later, the second Princess Luisa Fernanda was born. For the first time in 3 marriages, the king had children. Ironically, both were daughters, a shock to the monarch, who had always been obsessed with having a son to ensure the lineage. The appearance of the princesses should have been proof that all rumors about the king's fertility were over. However, the whispers in the dark became more widespread. Many skeptics suspected that the children were not of royal blood, but the result of some secret affair by the young queen. Others believed that the king had finally found an effective medical remedy or had been granted a miracle after years of prayer. But the most vicious rumors painted a macabre picture. Fernando may have sought out assisted reproduction, something considered taboo and almost sacrilegious in the religious and social context of the time. Whatever the truth, it is clear that the king's prestige was so badly eroded that even miracles could not save his public image. After gradually losing the respect of his courtiers, what pushed Fernando to the depths of the most terrifying self-destruction? Towards the end of his life, King Fernando not only struggled with physical illness, but also sank into a deep mental delirium. Gout, chronic digestive disorders, and a bloated body made him often immobile, making his mind even more unstable. He often had irrational anger, fell into prolonged depression, and the entire palace was covered in fear. Even more terrifying was his unusual obsession with masculinity. Medical records of the time show that he constantly requested remedies to improve his sexual performance, using everything from traditional medicines to rare herbs from the New World. For Fernando, physical strength was not only an instinct but also the ultimate symbol of power. His paranoia led him to believe that any criticism of the court was an attack on his manhood, and he responded with a cruelty that would make even those accustomed to medieval violence shudder. You won't believe what was found in the Spanish royal jar. In September 1833, King Ferdinand VII fell into critical condition due to complications from gout, kidney failure, and late-stage diabetes. He spent weeks torn between delirious fever and haunting lucidity when he clearly sensed death was approaching. On his deathbed, Ferdinand gave a strange order. According to some sources, he requested that his genitals be preserved as a testament to the masculine power he had obsessed over all his life. When he died on the 29th of September, his body was embalmed in a royal ritual that included removing his organs and treating them with preservatives. And then came a bizarre detail. His genitals were separated, placed in a glass jar filled with brandy, and kept in secret in the royal archives. This information did not appear immediately, but was only mentioned decades later. The writer Benito Pérez Galdós and other historians of the time alluded to the unusual fate of Ferdinand's body. In particular, Alexandre Dumas Sr., in his travel memoirs, said that a Spanish nobleman had revealed a last trophy of the Bourbons, implying the gruesome remains. The truth has never been officially confirmed, but the story lives on like a ghost that covers the name of Ferdinand VII with death, a secret and a jar that no one dares to open. In the early 20th century, a bizarre and chilling tale began to circulate widely in international literature and journalism. The British author Gerald Brennan, while residing in Spain in the 1920s, recorded the legend in his classic work on Spanish politics, The Spanish Labyrinth. Many American and French reporters who visited Madrid also quietly included the detail in their reports on the royal family. Although it was impossible to verify the specific evidence, what made the legend endure was not its reliability, but the fact that it exposed the way an entire society viewed King Fernando VII. Throughout the 19th century, the monarch's reputation was constantly exaggerated, and the legend of his genitals being retained after his death became a dark symbol of a dynasty obsessed with blood power, but completely powerless against real threats. Fernando lived his entire life in fear of being seen as incompetent in the matter of producing an heir. The story that he still sought to prove his manhood, even in his coffin, by preserving his genitals, is a scathing reflection of the personal obsession and collective madness of the times. Behind these gruesome rumors lies the stark truth of a society that tied fertility to the legitimacy of the state. When a king was suspected of being unable to have children, it not only brought personal humiliation, but also sowed chaos in the constitution and the court. Therefore, the act of preserving a part of his body, although perhaps a product of the popular imagination, became a symbol of the desperation to hold on to a bit of power that had rotted away. Above all, the story is a cruel mockery of the people towards the one who had ruled them with violence and contempt. When the public spread the idea that the only part of Fernando worth keeping was the one that had been endlessly discussed and ridiculed, they were enacting a kind of haunting and vicious revenge. It was not just a dirty joke, but history's way of preserving contempt in its most terrifying form. And what made the Franco regime want to erase it from history? To this day, there is no physical evidence to confirm the existence of the fearful relic associated with King Fernando VII. No document in the Spanish royal archives, which are very detailed, ever records the presence of such an object. Even during the tumultuous 20th century, when many royal secrets were exposed, the legendary vase was completely absent from all published documents. Researchers who have accessed the royal archives have never found any solid evidence. What is more remarkable, no subsequent Spanish king has ever mentioned this item, which is almost impossible if it really existed and had any political or symbolic significance. It is precisely this lack of evidence that contributes to the legend's macabre appeal. A story that cannot be proven, but cannot be denied either. During the Spanish Civil War and under Franco's dictatorship, the legend took on a strong political tone. Republicans used it to satirize the decadence of the monarchy, while the monarchists tried to suppress and obscure it. Franco, obsessed with symbols of power and masculinity, was said to have been so offended by the story that he ordered it removed from official records. However, after Franco's death and the advent of democracy, the legend was revived. This time, free from censorship, journalists and historians brought the story back to light through books, films and television shows, making it an integral part of Spain's collective memory, despite the fact that no concrete evidence has ever been found. This bizarre story is not only a chilling anecdote, but also a profound reflection on how society has changed its perception of power and gender over time. Fernando VII, King of Spain in the early 19th century, was once considered a symbol of absolute power, but he became the subject of one of the most bizarre myths in European royal history: that his genitals were preserved after his death as the ultimate symbol of manhood. In the 21st century, this story not only sounds like a creepy joke, but also exposes the paranoid obsession of a man with absolute power, an unchecked power that leads to a terrifying distortion of personal perception. For Fernando, asserting his manhood seemed to have become a sick obsession that crossed the line between his private life and the fate of the nation. His personal actions and decisions permeated the way he ruled, influencing both domestic and foreign policy and distorting Spain's already crumbling system of government. The contrast is even more stark when compared to other kings of the time. For example, Louis XI of France, while also facing rumors of his sexual prowess and his ability to inherit the throne, maintained a dignified royal image and avoided immoral stories. Meanwhile, Fernando lacked both political wisdom and wisdom, making him an easy target for gossip and ridicule. He is remembered not for his strategy of governing, but for his bizarre legends associated with the flesh. The legend of the immortal genitals is not just a historical joke. It reflects a time when European monarchies were struggling with irreversible changes: the rise of democratic ideas, the collapse of theocracy and royal honor. Fernando seems to have realized with some vagueness that the power he once held was fading. And instead of confronting this reality with reform or intelligence, he sought to maintain his dominance through a distorted and monstrous physical symbol. In the end, the irony of history is cruel. Despite all his efforts to assert his power and build the image of a great king, what made Fernando VII immortalized was not his political achievements, but a barbaric rumor that a part of his body was still in a glass jar, a bizarre legacy that he himself could never control, and perhaps it was the most terrible punishment that history has ever given to a monarch. Can a king be forever imprisoned in ridicule because a part of his body is said to have survived death intact? The bizarre story of Fernando VII is not only a bizarre anecdote in Spanish history, but also a grim testament to the precariousness of royal power. When he died in 1833, he carried with him the belief that he had firmly restored the absolute monarchy and protected the Bourbon dynasty's legacy. But just a few decades later, the throne he had once held so firmly collapsed in the earthquake of revolution, ousting his daughter, Queen Isabella II, from power. Spain lurched between regimes in the 20th century, making the monarchy a spectre that haunts modern politics. And while the king's body has long since decomposed, a part of his body, believed to be his genitals, is rumored to have been preserved in a glass jar, and the legend persists on social media, in documentaries, and in unofficial historical works. It has crept into the popular imagination, alongside stories like the madness of George III and the hemophilia of the Romanovs, twisted symbols of fallen glory. Whether the body actually exists, posterity will probably never know for sure. The royal archives have either been carefully hidden or have disappeared amid the chaos of wars and coups. But what keeps the legend alive is not its authenticity, but the message behind it. Power, masculinity, and ego are all fragile games. Ferdinand VII spent his life proving his strength and majesty, but what remains to posterity is cold laughter and bitter contempt. If there really is a jar containing such an organ, it is not a glorious relic, but a naked symbol of a soul gnawed by paranoia and selfishness. History does not allow itself to be sealed in glass. It will always find a way to expose the truth, especially to those who have tried to manipulate it for their own benefit.